Hi, this is part 2 of my video on Pukehinahina Gate Pa. Where we left off in part 1, a force of 250 warriors of the Ngaitarangi, Kohiriki, Pirirakau and other iwi, led by Rauri Puhirake, had built a pa on the site of the boundary fence and gate, south of the mission station at Taronga. A British army of 1,695 troops, commanded by Lieutenant General Duncan Cameron, had encircled the pa and bombarded it for 8 hours with a fearsome array of artillery pieces, creating a breach in the defences. Assuming the shells had killed many of the defenders and left the survivors shell-shocked, Cameron formed up his assault force of 300 men of the 43rd Monmouthshire Light Infantry and the Naval Brigade, with separate units in support and a sizable reserve. A rocket was used to signal to the 68th Light Infantry in the rear of the pa that the assault was beginning. Gamble states, "On the appointed signal, the assault was commenced in gallant style, and the men, splendidly led by the officers, dashed into the work, where they were quickly and desperately resisted by the Maoris, and hard fighting with personal encounters ensued. Colonel Booth and Commander Hay, who led, were both mortally wounded. Captain Hamilton, Royal Navy, who commanded the reserve, jumped on the parapet, and as he called on his men to follow him, was shot through the head. Lieutenant Hill, Royal Navy, was killed, and 4 captains of the 43rd, Glover, Muir, Hamilton and Utterton, whom there were probably no finer officers in the service, also fell, and several others were wounded. When the position seemed to be on the very point of being carried, our men, for some inexplicable cause, fell back before the Maoris, who fought to the death, and they retired under a heavy fire from the parapet, leaving behind several officers." Gamble neglects to mention that as the main party launched their assault, the 68th closed in on the rear of the pa. He mentions the death of Captain Hamilton, who was engaged when, as Cameron thought the assault was going well, sent in the reserves, who ran headlong into the retreating assault party. Hamilton was shot dead the moment he entered the pa, having just yelled, "Follow me, men!" And with half the reserve in the pa and the remainder outside, his men turned and joined the retreat. Unlike Rangiriri, where a heavy fire met the storming party, the troops were able to enter the pa without much difficulty. It was when inside that things went south for the troops. Henny also dictated an account of the assault on the smaller section of the pa to Cowan. "Some soldiers attempted to storm our wing of the pa, while the Blue Jackets attacked the central redoubt. Colonel Booth was the officer who commanded the attack on our defences. Of course, we did not know who it was until long afterwards. The top rail of our fence had been smashed by the shells, and the officer leading came over this and leapt into the trench, sword in hand. He was thrusting at our men with his sword. We all jumped out of our trenches to meet the assault, and there was a terrible combat hand to hand. Some of our men were firing, some were using their tomahawks, others the butt end of their guns. My brother and I were side by side. Not many soldiers got into the section of trench where we fought. I did not club my gun, but jumped into the trench again and was loading when the troops were driven out, leaving their leader and several men lying wounded within our lines. The Maoris rushed out of the pa and fired upon the soldiers in Blue Jackets, who fell back in disorder. Koka, leading us, was using a long-handled tomahawk. We'd all gone outside the fence in the excitement of the battle, following the retreating soldiers, when we were recalled and the firing began again. I fired several shots after we re-entered the ditch. All the time there was a cloud of gunpowder smoke over the pa, and a small drizzly rain began to fall. Once the British forces had entered the pa, the leading officers were almost all wiped out, killed or mortally wounded. Soldiers and seamen fought a brutal close combat in a maze of smoke-filled narrow trenches and bunkers for between 5 minutes and half an hour, depending on which source you believe. Loopholes installed into the roofs of the bunkers allowed warriors to fire on the troops above with complete security. The 68th fired volleys on the pa from the other side, and according to a reporter watching the battle, attempted 3 separate assaults. Gilbert Mair described a subaltern in the pa crying out, "My God! Here they come in their thousands!" right before the panic set in, and the soldiers fled the pa. I suspect that as the troops pushed deeper into the pa, in the claustrophobic, smoke-filled chaos, the fire coming from the 68th behind the pa through the works, and having lost a third of their numbers, without officers to steady and organise them, isolated in a maze of trenches, caused panic to erupt, and a rout began. The fleeing troops were caught in crossfire from the 2 pa, and pursued by the defenders from the smaller pa, as Henny said. Gamble's account continues. The work, it must be observed, was, in the interior, honeycombed with rifle pits and underground passages, and the enemy, lying concealed, had no doubt considerable advantage in shooting our men from concealed positions, while the assailants no doubt got into confusion, which must have been increased by their being suddenly deprived of so many of their leaders. Hori related this interesting snippet. I was amused at the coolness of one of our warriors in the thickest of the fight. He was a deeply tattooed old man of the past generation of Toa, meaning warrior. He had 6 or 7 bullets in his body, and being shot through both thighs was quite helpless. He was leaning against the remains of the parapet and had taken out his pipe, and was wanting to have a consoling smoke, but could not find a light. So he sat calling out, "Give me a light!" He was not, as you imagine, attended to, for everyone was fighting for dear life. Still his voice could be heard now and then above the tumult, especially when his excitement would overmaster him, and he would cry, fight on, my hearties, give it to them!" With one breath he would ask for a light, and then the next he would be urging on the battling tribesmen. Such queer things are but the ways of war. Back to Gamble. The Lieutenant General, hastening to the front on seeing the repulse, ordered the immediate commencement of a line of entrenchment about 100 yards in the left angle of the pa, and where many of the men sought the cover of a fall in the ground. Henny spoke of the wounded soldiers who were left in the pa. I was in the firing trench when I heard the wounded officer lying in our lines calling for water. There were other wounded soldiers distressed for want of water. When I heard these cries, I could not resist them. The sight of the foe with their lifeblood flowing from them seemed to elate some of our warriors, but I felt a great pity for them. She found an old nail can, filled it with water, braving the trip to the well that was enfiladed by the British forces, and brought it to Colonel Booth. I went down by his side and took his head in my knees, and said, "Here's water," in English. I poured some water in one hand, which I held close to his lips so that he could drink. He said, "God bless you," and drank again from my hand. I went to the 3 other soldiers and gave them water one by one in the same way. Henny was in the smaller outwork. In the main pass, similar acts of charity were done by Maori for the other wounded soldiers. Under cover of darkness, the Maori defenders evacuated the pa, slipping through the lines of the 68th through the swamps. This was a great victory for Ngaitarangi, and in May they would attempt to do the same again, constructing a new pa at Tauranga. Gamble reported 35 killed and 76 wounded. Maori lost 25 killed and an unknown number of wounded. One Victoria Cross was awarded during the battle to Samuel Mitchell of the HMS Harrier, who carried his commanding officer, Commander Hay, from the pa during the rout, disobeying a direct order from Hay to leave him and seek his own safety. The fallout for the British from this defeat was scathing. Initial media accounts of the battle provided by correspondents with the army described the pa as containing 800 to 1,000 warriors, but this was then reduced a couple of weeks later to 400, and the accounts from the Maori veterans state there were no more than 250. The initial report stated that the British force had done everything feasibly possible and were full of compassion for the troops and praise and respect for the Maori defenders. Over time, the media reports vary in their approach, some criticising the soldiers and sailors for not digging in and holding their positions, or criticising Cameron for not scouting the pa properly, not using a sap, and having his troops walk headlong into a trap set by a treacherous enemy. Some considered Maori as mere savages, and the British as just incompetent, while others gave Maori credit as a skillful and brave foe. The 43rd blamed the Naval Brigade for starting the rout, the Navy blamed the 43rd, and the 68th were accused of firing on their own side. Written in 1890, an account of Gate Pa by Samuel Beaton described the immediate fallout amongst the surviving officers. The night of the 29th of April was, in the British camp at Tauranga, a night of deep humiliation and mutual reproach. The men were disgraced in their own eyes, and what would the people of England say? There's not a more gallant regiment in the service than the 43rd, but now where are all the laurels they had won in the peninsula and India, soiled and trampled in the dust, and by whom? Not by a force equal to them in arms and discipline, not by foemen worthy of their steel, but by a horde of half-naked, half-armed savages, whom they've been taught to despise. Here's an extract from the Daily Southern Cross. The evidence of military genius which General Cameron has laid before the world will hardly be considered satisfactory to impartial critics. He cannot plead that he is deficient in any of the necessary appliances of war. He's had a force under him which he should consider sufficient to sweep the whole race which this country has infested into the sea. It's painfully clear that he has exhibited something approaching to incapacity. We have heard so much in late years of the wonderful improvements in projectiles and other implements of war, that it was natural to suppose that it would require a very clever enemy indeed to struggle for victory with a British general. But these improvements do not seem to have the least effect when brought to bear upon savages. Infested? Bloody hell. And calling the Maori who treated the British wounded in this battle with a degree of care and respect hitherto never encountered before in the New Zealand War savages? That's pretty messed up too. Archdeacon Octavius Hadfield went so far as to say, "There can be no doubt that the men of the assaulting party were a lot of arrant cowards." As I hope my account has made clear, this Maori victory was not the result of British incompetence or cowardice. Cameron carefully encircled the pa with a well-trained, well-equipped and numerous force, enfilading it with a 6-pound Armstrong. He bombarded the pa with a ferocious artillery barrage for 8 hours using both direct and indirect fire with explosive shells. Only once a practical breach had been made and everyone present thought that the defenders had been shelled into oblivion did he order a sizable assault party with fire support and a reserve to storm the pa. They entered a confusing maze of brilliant Maori military engineering. The soldiers were crowded into this small space, isolated in narrow trenches and gunned down from hidden positions, fighting for a considerable time in those nightmarish conditions. Their officers were the first to fall, and certainly the lack of leadership played a role in the resulting rout. This was a Maori victory because of their brilliant military engineering, discipline and courage under fire. Now St George's Anglican Church sits on the site of the central redoubt of the pa, and the secondary redoubt is covered with a car park on the other side of Cameron Road. A small memorial is located on the site with a waharoa, a carved Maori gateway, and a line of carved po running along the roadside. Other memorials to the soldiers of the 43rd Regiment, to the Naval Brigade, to Raruri Puhirake, and to Hori Naitai are located in the Old Mission Cemetery on Marsh Street. There's a huge amount written about this battle, and I can't do full justice to it all here, despite the length of this video. I hope you found this account of the New Zealand War's battle interesting. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment and subscribe. Cheers!